Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Divergent Dialogues. In this episode, we'll be talking about navigating love and autism. I guess I wanted to start off by talking about some of the inner world experiences, particularly the psychological factors that can come into play for autistic folks. So there's a high prevalence of anxiety and social anxiety among autistic folks, which can create a lot of concerns for people that are in relationships, particularly, I guess, thinking about, I guess, the future of relationship, and also it can impact on, I guess, some of those social rules and social norms around dating. So there's been research that's indicated that autistic women can find dating quite difficult because there's not necessarily a structure to it. And I guess it can vary by culture. But I guess, like back in the day, I guess it was a lot more structured. People would be in smaller communities. They would meet someone and they'd kind of get married. Like at least in like Western culture, it's kind of like, you'd meet someone, you'd get married pretty quick, sort of thing. These days, very different. We have
There was all these like key markers, like you meet someone and you're courting for a certain amount of time, and then this step happens, and then this step happens, and if this thing has happened, then marriage is imminent. And there was also some fairly accepted time frames around how long you court for, how long before you get married. And now it's just all a big guessing game.
Yeah, exactly. So for an autistic person, like having those really defined rules and timelines could be quite helpful. But these days it's a free for all. Like we've got online dating. People can have quite casual relationships. Some people may have like a friends with benefits kind of situation, all these sorts of things where a lot of the communication is kind of implicit and non-verbal. People are just kind of expected to know where people are at, and what kind of relationship people are wanting, and kind of subscribing to that kind of, I guess, the new social norms around dating. So I guess I can speak for myself. Like I'm a very upfront kind of person. So obviously I'm married now, so I don't go around doing this anymore. But when I was dating, like when I was interested in someone, I would just talk to them and be like, I'm interested in you. And for some people, they found that quite odd, and they're like, oh, because apparently there's all these kind of really subtle innuendo sort of ways that you're meant to kind of flirt and do all this stuff. And and yeah, so I think sometimes there can be a bit, if we're talking about that double empathy problem, like for me, I would love it if someone would just come up to me and be like, this is exactly what I think and exactly what I feel. But for some people, they may not feel comfortable with that. That might feel like too much for them. So yeah, there's a myriad of social stuff that's there, which may not fit for the autistic person, or it may be hard for them to intuit some of this stuff. And I speak from personal experience. But yeah, what was your experience of dating, Teena?
Well, this is actually, I think, a really important one, because it highlights how we can actually be left quite vulnerable in certain situations. So I was married and then divorced, and I re-entered the world of dating when online dating was a thing, and invitations to come over for Netflix and chill. My if I received that invitation, my first thought is there is no way you're going to be able to choose a Netflix program that I'd be interested in. You haven't even asked me what I like to watch. You know, being very logical in my thinking, they've invited me over to come over and watch Netflix and order Uber Eats or something.
Yeah.
Partly thinking, gee, that sounds pretty boring because I can't sit through a whole movie or anything. And then, yeah, the issue of how would we decide what to watch? But yeah, like the language and around that sort of thing, you know, most people know that is in fact an invitation to come over and have sex.
Yes.
Totally
Yeah.
missed it. I didn't see that at all.
Yeah.
So yeah, like that is an example of how we can be quite vulnerable in that dating situation. Obviously I never went because I just could not fathom a situation where they would be able to choose something I'd want to watch. So
Yeah.
I thought, no, I'm not going to trap myself into such a boring evening. But other people, yeah, it could be a situation where they can be quite vulnerable because of that, yeah, implied language stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I guess that, you know, that can really feed into some of those anxieties where you're not really sure, I guess, where people are at, and then you're being quite forthcoming with how you're feeling and what's going on for you, and then they're kind of feeling a bit awkward and not sure where to go with that either. So
Yeah.
it's just this kind of, yeah, kind of merry-go-round. But
And then the other side is I guess where it's been suggested that I'm quite a flirt, and I could never understand why that was.
yeah,
But it turns out that when you ask a person too many questions or sort of give them too much attention, that implies that you are like really interested.
yeah,
But in a social situation, if you started talking to me about something that I'm really interested in, then I'm probably going to accidentally isolate myself with you and ask you a million questions because I want to know what you know.
yeah,
And it's an interesting conversation, way easier than trying to navigate the 10 other conversations that are going on. And apparently that is quite flirtatious.
yeah, yeah. Or on the
Who
other
knew?
side, where like I like still to this day, I'll maybe one day go, oh, I think that person was flirting with me, or oh, I think that person was interested in me. Like pretty much, unless someone just said outright, "I'm interested in you," or made it incredibly obvious that they were interested in me, I just didn't have a clue at all.
Same,
And
which is why online dating is pretty good for an autistic person because it's clear from the get-go.
yeah,
You're on the app for a reason and you've swiped on me for a
yeah.
reason. Great, clean it up. Let's go.
But I guess the other thing is that people are there to meet someone, but why they're there to meet someone may vary as well. So,
Exactly.
and sometimes trying to figure that out can be hard. Another important thing to consider with autistic folks in relationships is that there's a higher prevalence of same-sex attraction and gender non-conforming feelings for autistic folks compared to the general population. And I think that's a really important point to talk about because, you know, when you're autistic, there can be, you know, a lot of these challenges that we've talked about when we're kind of entering that dating phase. But also, you know, if you're gender non-conforming or like queer, that just adds like other layers of complexity to that as well. And I mean, I I actually found out, I actually came out as gay before I found out that I was autistic. But I think like being an autistic person and kind of going into that queer community, especially as like I came out in my late 20s, it was pretty like full on, because like as an autistic person with sensory issues, you know, a lot of queer spaces, there's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of bright colors, and you know, very social. And I think, you know, the ADHD side of me was like, ooh, cool, like I love rainbows, I love glitter, this is awesome. But it was also quite overwhelming for me to kind of go into that kind of culture, and it was hard for me to figure out where my place was in that. And like things like Pride, like you know, I'd love to go to Pride and all these sorts of things, but like if I do that, I'll be like wiped out for a few days,
Yeah.
because it's usually in summer, it's really hot, like there's like so many sensory overwhelm things there, for me. So, and you know, also I was trying to navigate being queer and you know, and being autistic as well. Luckily now, like I'm married now, and I was married when I found out that I was autistic. But I look back now and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like no wonder it was such a struggle. And the other thing is that there's, you know, just the general dating culture, but queer dating culture is different again as well. So then it's like, okay, well, I figured out these dating rules, now I've got to figure out these dating rules, and but there aren't rules. Yeah, those sorts of things. So it can be, yeah, it can be really challenging. And I think like particularly having that, I guess, double minority status, it can be really challenging, because you're trying to find acceptance in the wider community, in the queer community, the autistic community, and it's hard to know exactly where you fit. I guess we've talked a lot around you know, engaging in that sort of dating process and like the social and cultural norms around that, and how autistic people may struggle to navigate that. But I think it's also important to consider that like a lot of autistic people may feel like they need to subscribe to social norms and expectations within their relationships once they're in an established relationship. And for some autistic folks, the social demands of being in a relationship may be really tricky to navigate. You know, for some people, if there's an expectation that they have to spend a lot of time with their partner, that can be pretty full on. You know, and especially when it comes to you know, that when you're in a relationship with someone, you're not just taking on the partner, you're taking on the friends, you're taking on the family as well. And you know, when it's Christmas time, or we've got Christmas on the mind because it was Christmas lately. You know, it's Christmas time, and you know, you've got a new partner, and you know, you might want to kind of show them off to the family and be like, look, here's my new partner and they're awesome and whatever. And if that person's autistic, they might be freaking out, going, oh my gosh, like, you know, there's going to be sensory everyone, there's going to be all these people, there're going to be all these social demands. And you know, it's those sorts of things where for some people it's like, oh awesome, they're introducing me to their family, and like there is an element of that, like that's awesome. But I guess for autistic people, sometimes it's like, yeah, thank you, I really appreciate that, but also that's pretty overwhelming for me as well. Another thing that can be overwhelming is that some autistic people may need a lot of alone time, and sometimes feeling the pressure to communicate and be around their partner a lot. You know, some autistic people may prefer not to live with their partner as well. So those sorts of things. So I guess
Actually, there's actually a growing group of people that are doing just that. You know, being married, being in a committed relationship, but intentionally living separately.
yeah.
You know, like which I think is like it's so brilliant that it is. Yeah, okay. So economically, it would be much cheaper for us to live together, but let's prioritize our own personal needs ahead of that economical stuff, and yeah, be okay with living separately and yeah, just doing relationships differently.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's important to consider that, or think about that, autistic or not, like we don't have to subscribe to these social norms in relationships. And really, it's about you and that other person identifying your needs, being able to come up, with a plan or an idea of what works for the both of you. And for some people, it's like, okay, we want to live together. Some people, it's we don't want to live together. Okay, if we're living together, what's that going to look like? Are we going to have separate bedrooms? Are we going to sleep in the same bed? Because for some autistic people, sharing a bed with someone might be too sensory overwhelming for them, and they need that separate bed. Like when I go to sleep, I say to my partner, I'm like, don't touch me. Like you can't. If you touch me, I won't be able to sleep. Things like that. Or, some people may have a particular blanket or, need the air conditioning to be at a very specific temperature and a very specific fan blowing speed. So,
yeah. Or the material in which your sheets are made from.
Yes.
Yeah, that can all factor in. And if
Yes.
what you need is different to what your partner needs, then
yes.
okay, how are we going to navigate that? Because
Yeah.
one of the like those social expectations around relationships is that's drilled into us from so many different avenues is relationships are all about compromise.
Yeah.
But when that idea of compromise is spoken about, it's about, like one person giving up what they think, feel, want, need because it's more important for the other person. But sometimes that compromise is, well, I really need satin sheets, you really need cotton sheets, and there is no compromise here because one of us is not going to sleep. So how about we just sleep in separate beds?
Well, I thought of a compromise for that.
Oh, yeah.
You could both have your own sheet. You could get a single sheet of your preference and sleep with that sheet.
But what about the one underneath?
Find a seamstress that can sew together two halves of a sheet.
Yes, yeah, that would be my go-to. Or I like the idea of, when you go to a hotel and they've got like the two double beds or whatever.
They zip in the center. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the idea of that, but just you have yours, I'll have mine,
Yeah.
and we can just have them next to each other.
Yeah. And that's the awesome thing about having a neurodivergent partner is that they're probably going to come up with all these sorts of different ideas, and
Yeah.
you will know
Workarounds.
does it work? Awesome.
Yeah.
Like I'm very lucky to have a partner who is very accommodating, and I think what you said before around compromise, it's like, yeah, you probably like wants. Yeah, you should probably I think it's fair to compromise on wants. It's not great to compromise on needs,
Yeah.
because regardless of the other person's needs, you still have your own needs.
Yeah.
And it's probably better to find someone who, maybe you both have similar needs, or maybe for someone else it's a want as opposed to a need, and they're able to compromise. But I think you're completely right. Like there are some things that you can't compromise on as much as you would like to. Like like my partner would like to cuddle me when going to sleep, but it's like, well, you can do that, but I'm not going to be able to sleep. Like it's a sensory thing. I can't.
Yeah. You're laying awake like, is she asleep yet?
And it's like, and for some people they go, oh, well, that's pretty cruel. But it's like, well, I explained to her, I'm like, I'd love to be able to do that, but my sensory system is like going freaking out and not letting me sleep.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really important to think outside the box. Like sometimes, when you're coming together with someone, you're coming together with your own unique needs, and sometimes it isn't going to be a conventional approach. Sometimes it's that out of the box thinking that can help you to find these solutions. And as long as you're working together to try and find these solutions, that's what really matters. And you just
And
I think
I think a person's commitment to trying to find the solutions is a real expression of love. Sort of like we touched on last week around the self-interest driven nervous system. Like we're just trying to get our needs met, look after ourselves. So if a person's putting in a lot of time, energy, thought, and like exploring solutions to solve a problem of how can I share a bed with the person that I love, or a house, or whatever, in a way that isn't sort of really stressful for me and that is really nurturing for them as well. Like that in itself is an expression of love, because that takes a lot of energy, and it uses up a lot of time that can be spent doing other things.
Yeah. I remember before my partner and I moved in together, I had this discussion with her and I said, look, in order for me to function and not have a meltdown, I didn't know it was a meltdown back then, because I didn't know I was autistic, but if this is going to work, the house has to be set out in an incredibly particular way and stay that way. And I'm like, are you willing to consent to this? And she was like, yeah, okay. I'm like, all right, well, I'm giving you a pre-warning, letting you know. And all, there's obviously teething issues and things like that when you move in together. But my partner has ADHD, and organizing spaces and things like that. And, it is a bit of a struggle for her. And although at the beginning that was probably a bit frustrating, now she goes, oh, actually, like, this is really helpful. Like, obviously you set things up in a way that helps you, but this is actually helping me as well, because I'm feeling more organized and, I know where everything is. So I'm not becoming, frustrated or dysregulated. And because literally, like, in my house, if you ask me where something is, I can tell you exactly where it is, because everything has a place and a spot. And is that usual? No, but that's just how my brain works. And that helps me to feel comforted in my home, knowing where everything is. I guess for me, I need structure because it makes me feel less stressed, and also it helps a lot with my executive functioning issues. And it was the same for my partner. It helps a lot with her executive functioning as well. So it was kind of a win-win. So that's the thing. Like, sometimes it's like, okay, this is a big adjustment, but it can be helpful for both partners if they're both open to, I guess, exploring these things. And sometimes you do have to just kind of give things a go and see how it works out.
Take a chance on love.
Yeah.
It can be really scary though, because there are a lot of I guess expectations that people go into a relationship with, and quite often people don't know why they have these expectations. They've just been sort of internalized as the norm and what people do. And then when you're in that relationship and either person isn't complying with the expectations that you thought everybody sort of lived by, that can be a bit confronting. So being comfortable having those conversations around what you want your relationship to look like, and having some shared interests, some shared goals that you're working towards together can be really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think something else that's really important to touch on is that in the past, or even currently, probably in some places, there's been a misconception that autistic folks aren't interested in romantic relationships, or they're asexual. And, for some autistic folks, that may be the case. But I think it's important to to say, well, no, there's heaps of autistic people that are in all kinds of relationships, whether that's casually dating, or in a committed relationship, or married, or single, and I think it's important to understand that autistic folks want loving connection just as much as anybody else, however that looks. And and that we're not these kind of emotionless robots that don't want connection. It's just the way that we connect may look a little bit different. And I think if you take the time to get to know an autistic person and their needs and their love languages and their little quirks, we can be some of the most awesome people that you can date, because
I would agree.
because there's some fundamental things about us which are pretty awesome. But I think for some people it can be a bit of an adjustment. But I think just approaching relationships with that love and that support and that open-mindedness can be really helpful. And also I think that misconception that being in a relationship with an autistic person is automatically going to be more challenging, and that's not the case. Like people that aren't autistic, that are neurotypical, can potentially be really challenging to be in a relationship with. People, when you're coming into a relationship, you come with all sorts of things. You come with what you've learned growing up, and how relationships were modeled to you, and your experiences and your traumas, and all those sorts of things. So I don't think it's fair to assume that being in a relationship with an autistic person is going to automatically be more challenging. Again, it may look different. Yeah, so I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, Teena.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with what you said. I don't think that it's necessarily more challenging to be in a relationship with an autistic person. It's just different challenges. And I think it goes for any relationship, neurotypical, autistic, ADHD, or otherwise. Trying to park your assumptions and expectations at the door. It's hard to do, because you go into a relationship with lots of experience, whether it's from your upbringing or the relationships that have been modeled to you. That is your experience, so you go in there with assumptions and expectations. But being able to understand why you think what you think, and if that is actually true for you, thinking about the whole like moving in together example, that's that is an expectation that a lot of people have, that if we're going to be in a relationship and it's committed and all that sort of stuff, then yes, the next step is to live together. That doesn't work for me. Yeah, I that's not the next step for me. I need a lot more time to get used to things, and so that's not going to happen in any sort of short time frame. So yeah, understanding why you think what you think, and then choosing whether or not you want to keep it or discard that expectation.
Yeah, and it all comes back to consent. Like like with my partner, I said, if we're going to live together, this is how I feel comfortable. Are you happy to consent to that? And I mean, did she fully know what she was getting into? Maybe not. But I tried to be as clear as possible and as honest as possible. And it's worked out great. And that's the thing. Like, I guess when you're expressing these sorts of needs, if they are unique, sometimes it can bring up some of that rejection sensitivity stuff, because it's like, okay, I'm asking this thing, it's kind of outside these social norms, like, is this going to be accepted? But the thing is like, much like you were talking about in the last episode around that rejection sensitivity and people pleasing, is that I find that, I mean, this is in my own personal experience and just in general working with my clients, is that you're better off to have a good understanding of your needs and your boundaries at the beginning and expressing that, and that person, the other person, consenting or not consenting to that.
Yeah.
I think it becomes more challenging when you've portrayed yourself to be a particular kind of person, and then halfway through you go, oh, actually no. And I mean, and that's totally okay as well. Like, obviously consent is evolving and changing, and and your needs may evolve and change as well. But you're better off finding someone who is going to accept you how you truly are. And people gel with different people. Like, I know for myself, I could not date someone who was like me, because it would not work. Because if I was like, hey, the house has to be completely in this particular way. The other person will be like, no, the house has to be particularly in my way. And that would not work. Whereas I found someone who was like, I don't care, do your thing. I was like, cool. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you've
I
just
could not date someone like me because the amount of questions that I ask would make my brain explode if I was on the receiving end and having to answer them.
Yeah, that's my partner. She's the like I just come up with these random questions and she's just so good about it. She's like, yeah, right.
Yeah, so's mine. Sometimes he just looks at me with a strange look and go, okay. But he, goes along with it. But it reminds me of this quote from Trent Dalton's book Love Stories.
Yeah.
It says something about love being a commitment, but not just a commitment to the other person. It's a commitment to holding a safe space where both of you can grow and change, and that is accepted and done in a way together. Because you talked about knowing a bit about yourself and being able to express those needs from the beginning, which I totally agree with. But what happens when you get, 3, 5, 10 years into a relationship, and then you start to recognize that, there's this thing about me that I've been suppressing for my whole life because of, various different reasons. And now I realize that I absolutely, can't stand the way you put the rubbish out. Just to simplify it. But yeah, like what happens when you do start to recognize things about yourself that mean you have to ask your partner to change and adapt after such a long time together. Yeah. And I love that quote from Love Stories from Trent, because I think that felt really safe for me. That, commitment is about having a safe space where I'm allowed to change and grow and be different to what I was when we first met, and that we're committed to getting to know each other when those changes occur.
Yeah, I agree. I think, you need to grow together for it to work. Because when I got married, I didn't know that I was an autistic ADHD, and my partner didn't know that she was an ADHD either. So, I mean, fundamentally, we haven't, in that regard, we haven't changed. We've always been autistic, yeah. But yeah, I think getting that diagnosis, it does change things, and you do a lot of that kind of self-reflection, and it can change dynamics of things, but it can also help to explain a lot of things too. You're like, okay, so that's why this is a challenge, and that's why this and that. So but yeah, so I think that quote was really lovely, and I think that's probably a really good place to finish off the episode. So thank you for everyone for listening. We really appreciate the time that you take to listen to these podcasts. We're really passionate about getting this information out, and I really hope that you check out our blogs as well. If you go on our Substack, Teena and I have our blogs there, which are the topics are centered around the topics for the podcast. Also, if you wanted to check out our website and that kind of thing, I'll put those in the show notes as well.